Hello and welcome to the Last Edit podcast, a weekly film podcast with myself, Sid and Sleeve, and my amazing friend.
Silver Hawkins.
Now, each week, for those of you who don't know, Silver and I alternate between different films that we've chosen, and then we essentially have a deep down, hardcore discussion about said film and pull it apart for your wonderful viewership. Now, this week we've been on a bit of an animation fest recently, so I chose a film that I have great nostalgia for. I grew up with it to some extent, and I've watched it plenty of times. And it's just got a bit of a uniqueness about it that I really like, and that is Don Bluth's 1982 film, The Secret of Nimh. Now, this was Don Bluth's first directorial debut. Prior to that, he'd helped make films with Gary Goldman, and prior to that, he worked at Disney. And he was a very young animator at the time at Disney. You could see he had a very classic style that fitted into the golden era of Disney cartoon, even to some extent the bronze era. When you look at things like the Black Cauldron, it's very similar aesthetically, and he just wanted to do his own thing. He was finding the constraints at Disney were holding him back. They weren't allowed to like test things out and try new techniques. And as we can see in The Secret of Nim a little bit later when we discuss the way it particularly is shot and its shot selections and the way the characters are presented, the eyes are used. It's quite expressionistic in many ways, which Disney wasn't really. You know, it was still the old guard at Disney. Walt Disney himself had gone, but a lot of the old original members of that team, of that board, were there, and they were very hesitant to try and do these new things. So, real quick kind of recap of the narrative. Basically, Mrs. Brisby and her young family are on a farm, and it's very almost time for the fields to be cut and the harvest taken in. And this is a time when all the animals have to move home or move out of that area because their homes will be destroyed. Now, Mrs. Brisby has recently lost her husband, Jonathan. She's got a bunch of kids, and the youngest kid called Timmy, is incredibly ill. And she has to find a way to move Timmy before the harvest happens. And off she goes on these grand adventures to try and help her young son. So, I mean, I've seen it quite a lot. I hadn't seen it for a good while, to be fair, before we did this podcast. But what were your overarching thoughts about Secret of Nim?
Well, I mean, like you, I'd grown up with it. I had very fond childhood memories of it. Made a huge impact on me when I saw it as a kid. But to be honest, like returning to it, I found it didn't really hold up all that well for me. Like there were just too many questions left unanswered for me throughout the film that like loose ends that it never really ties up or addresses. Like Mrs. Brisby, it's revealed that Jonathan was part of like the NIMH, the National Institute for Mental Health in America, who ran various experiments on rats and mice, like psychological experiments to see to experiment with urban density and stuff. In pretty harrowing experiments.
Yes.
But they then in Secret of Nim they've been like these rats and mice have been injected with like super serums to make them super smart, and Jonathan was one of these mice, and Mrs. Brisby wasn't, and it sort of leaves the question: so how presumably Jonathan taught her or whatever.
Yeah, how to speak or how to.
Yeah,
but
how
even
to
so
speak.
again.
But again, it's like doesn't quite quite make
No.
sense to me, and there are a lot of questions like that are kind of left unanswered. Where I go, wait a minute, that I didn't as a kid, because as a kid I was completely enthralled by it, but I think returning to it as an adult, it didn't hold up for me quite as well as it did as watching it as a child.
I know what you mean, and there's a number of characters for me that impact on that as well. One is Jeremy, the comic relief crow, who, as
Yeah.
a kid, I found hysterical. Now, when you go back, his jokes really aren't that great, and he doesn't really do a great deal in forwarding the plot apart from getting in the way of everything. And there's nothing wrong with comic relief, but I'm just not sure the tone of the jokes now and the way they're delivered work. It's a bit almost too goofbally for me.
And Jeremy, of course, is played by a Bluth staple, Dom DeLuise.
Yeah. Good luck charm, I think, Don Bluth.
Yeah.
I thought he was. He was in almost everything he did. But he's certainly one. And then another one in particular is Jenna, who is not the sub-leader of the Rats of Them, the one who wants to rebel against Nicodemus. And part of the problem with his character is we don't really know who he is. We have no idea about his motivation. We don't know why he's really wanted to do what he wanted to do, why he wants to change the path in which the rats are taking. It's very one-dimensional
Well,
character.
that's the thing he doesn't want. He doesn't want to change the path, right? He wants to stay where he is. That's
Stay
why.
where
That's
he is,
why he
yeah.
goes into conflict with Nicodemus, because Nicodemus, Justin, and so forth. They all want to move the rat headquarters because harvesting day or whatever it is coming. Where they live, the farmer who lives where they live and owns the fields is gonna harvest the field, which is gonna put them all in danger, and so they want to move to another place. And Jenner doesn't.
Well, I think it's also to do with power thing, isn't it? Because Nicodemus, they're currently stealing power from the farmer,
Yeah.
and he doesn't want to do that. He
No,
doesn't
they want to be
like the notion
They
of
want to be self-sufficient. Yeah.
exactly completely self-sufficient. So there are these gaping holes in logic and in motivation for a lot of the different characters and how they fit. There's that bit, for instance, where finally Mrs. Brisby has got into the Secret of Nimh kind of bush and has found Nicodemus and they're having a chat, and it gives the amulet and stuff. And then he says, sorry, something about the fact that if Jonathan had still been alive, he would have outlived her by how many ridiculous amounts of years. And again, it's like, how did she learn to speak? How did she even understanding all this crazy?
And where does Nicodemus's magic come from? Like the gate and stuff.
Yeah, and the amulet. It's just
Yeah.
at the end where it turns into this massive red bubble thing, and you're like, well, I didn't see that coming.
Yeah.
That was weird. I mean, the best thing about this film is the animation.
Oh, for sure.
It's just stunning. I mean, Don Bluth anyway I've admired his work for a very long time, but I think this is the pinnacle of his particular style of animation. Bold, really colourful, amazing use of contrast against that colour. Very, very dark ambience about it for a kid's film. I kind of put it in that bracket of Black Cauldron and Watership Down. It's certainly not as macabre as Watership Down. Watership Down takes animated macabre to a slightly new height above those two, but it feels a bit like those two films because what it does, which a lot of children's films don't do or didn't do then anyway, is have morally grey characters. Like for instance,
Yeah.
there's a bit where Mrs. Brisby goes to speak to the Great Owl,
Yeah.
and the
That's
Great Owl.
probably the scariest segment of the film, especially for children.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. The tone changes, the atmosphere changes. Visually, the owl's design is creepy and contorted, but quite overbearing and powerful. And he seems like he's obviously cleared up everything that's living around him. Most things are scared of him, but for some reason, he's a sage in this film. And although that moral ambiguity is there to begin with, what could be seen as a looking like an evil character or antagonist becomes a semi-protagonist in the way that they help Mrs. Frisbee just in the direction they need to go. You get that with a few different characters in this. You know, they have that really great flourish in visual design, very bold and big and ominous at times, which I think is brilliant on screen. The way the Great Owl fills the frame,
Yeah, he is.
I think it's beautiful.
Yeah, I mean that whole sequence is amazing. Absolutely.
And the special effects, just in terms of the lighting that they use and fire and magic and the purples, it's really viscerally appealing, and especially for a kid, you can get drawn into that world really easily.
Yeah, for sure. And it uses that staple of like animated films at the time where it creates two worlds. Like there's the world of the humans, and then there's
Yeah.
the world of like the animals or minor creatures or whatever, like the borrowers or the Fraggles from Fraggle Rock, or like even
Love the Fraggle Rock.
even the later Basil of Baker Street Disney movie also does the same thing, where you have a miniature society that lives underneath the larger society, and they're
and it uses
copies
a
of each other.
microcosm.
Yeah.
It's used like a microcosm to try and express elements of that society within the microcosm.
Precisely. Yeah.
It's beautifully done. I mean, the music as well. I mean, the music is it's quite different from a lot of older school animated films. It's really quite cinematic, and it's very pacey and quick moving at times. The scene where Miss Frisbee is trying to stop the harvester, the tractor, and is pulling on all kinds of wires, trying to the pace of that, and the way the shots are often canted as well, which is something else you don't see in animated films of this type anyway, which is really unusual. One thing I'd like to touch on as well is the eyes in this film. the eyes are used to some amazing effect. You know, that Jeremy's eyes that roll with colour sometimes when you're doing crazy things. Nicodemus, those bright yellow, piercing kind of eyes that just beam from his head. And a lot of that is the eyes are often, the windows of the soul, the usual thing we say about this stuff. But in animation, the way it's used in this film is just so much more interesting than I've seen it in some other more traditional films, in particularly in a Disney sense.
I think really the animation to me was reminiscent of Disney in that it felt a lot like Robin Hood, and to an
Yeah.
extent, the later Basil of Baker Street as well, where just especially Basil of Baker Street, where like the mice both in Nim and Baker Street sort of move the same way, have the same sort of facial expressions and eye movements and so forth. So yeah, but I mean, I think I think you're right that a lot of like the emotion of the film and from the characters is mainly done through expression rather even than the voice acting, which isn't to say that the voice acting is poor. It's just
Well, I
that
think
the expressions and the character designs themselves lend the characters more personality, like Jenner, for instance.
yeah. Oh, absolutely. And I think it really comes across on screen that the motion, as you said, the animation itself, is really fluid and interesting and looks amazing to watch on screen. Voice acting, for the most part, is really good. I mean, Derek Jacobi is a great Nicodemus. That kind of suits, that sage character really well. Uh, who was it who played the Great Owl now?
I don't remember.
Old school actor, I should know, but he has a very weighty, powerful voice, and that's really suited to him as well. Most of the casting it works really well. The
Yeah,
problem with the film, as you said, is the narrative is kind of all over the place in terms of what should work and what shouldn't work.
yeah. I mean,
Jonathan,
yeah. I mean, thinking back on it, Jonathan, like he's hailed as this major hero, like almost messianic figure. And then when Nicodemus tells Mrs. Brisby the story of what he did, all he did was basically just climb between some bars and open a hatch.
yeah, yeah.
That was the extent of his courageous heroism. Yeah.
So yeah, he helps a bunch of rats and some mice escape from this experiment, and then all of a sudden he is the Messiah, which is just a bit odd.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just odd plot lines and convolution, and not quite fleshing out some of the characters that is a bit detracting to the overall way the plot works. Everything else is really cool in the film, but it's those plot moments and some of the characters which are a bit trite and really need a bit more oomph to kick them into the main story. I mean, Mrs. Frisbee. So yeah, so she sees a guy called Mr. Ages. He's the scientific mouse, which is I thought it was very cool. And he gives her a remedy to help Tim. And then she meets Jeremy, goes off on all these random adventures with him. He gets caught up in string because he's a buffoon and he can't fly properly because he's also a buffoon, and he keeps falling over because he's a buffoon. Then he wears a dress because he's a buffoon. And he's scared of that giant cat who's stalking them from the
To be
farmer's
fair,
house.
everyone is scared of that cat.
Everyone's scared of that cat.
Justifiably so.
Yeah, he's a little bit of a monster. But off they go then on this really cool journey, which you don't see often. I mean, that era, female-led and also a mother, is a really interesting lead character to have in an animated film. And I guess that's also, a nice way for kids to be introduced to the protection of mother in an animated way, or the extent a mother will go to help a child. But yeah, so we get Mr. Ages, we get the remedy, we go back. The farming is it's happening. The cutting of the wheat is happening. We go through that scene. We see the owl, and then it's the trek to try and find the rats of Nim in this secret bush by the farmer's house. I think that works really well. I like the mystery of it.
Yeah, I mean, when she first arrives in the rats headquarters, or the rats thorn bush, and she runs into what's it, Bruce, or what is it?
Brutus, I think,
right?
isn't it?
Yeah, the sentry. And has to run away from him. Yeah. And and that sequence with Brutus is another one of the like the owl, like the kind of really scary, unnervy scenes in the film.
Yeah, she's getting chased around, and then it's Jeremy, not Jeremy. Loads of J's in this film apparently. Loads of characters called Jay. Justin, who she meets,
Well,
who's
no, no,
this.
no. She meets before she meets Justin. She meets up with the
Oh,
inventor.
Mr.
Yeah,
Aegis.
Mr. Aegis.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, because Mr. Aegis knows the rats of Nim,
yeah,
knows Nicodemus, has been kind of helping them for a little while, and she is eventually taken to Nicodemus, or well, the court first, isn't it? I think it's the rat court first. She enters
yeah,
that room, and that's when they're all arguing about what they're going to do in the future. Should they stay and should they go? And Jenna is a very brash, loud, arrogant character who thinks he knows best and is trying to convince them one way or another. And then he sees Mrs. Frisbee, kind of learns that she's Jonathan's
widow.
ex-widow, and devises a plan to use her to turn the rats against Nicodemus and for him to then take over and be leader. He's an interesting character, but I just need fleshing out more. I just need to know more about him. Just not the cause end result of I don't want to do this. Any reason? That'd be better. But well, yeah, when she meets Nicodemus, that's really cool. I really like the effects. I like the amulet and the staff and the kind of the mysticism around him and the way he looks and his design, like this old 105-year-old wizard or something from Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I mean, for my part, I didn't really need deeper motivation for Jenner. I think maybe because to me he was basically just sort of the embodiment of conservatism. You know, that that whole thing of no, I don't want to move forward. I want to stay where I am. I want to keep things the way they are now. I don't want things to progress or change. I just want to keep them stagnant.
Stay in the bubble that works. Yeah.
Yeah, basically.
Rather than progressivism, which is an interesting concept again in an animated film, and that's why I think parts of this work for an adult. It's got enough themes.
Well, yeah, it just doesn't hold up to the extent it did when I watched it as a kid. I mean, I'm not saying at all that I think it's poor or anything. It's just that there were issues throughout the film that I didn't have when watching it as a kid.
Oh no, completely agree. The good thing about it's a very breezy film. So if you're just after a film which is really great to look at, has got an incredibly simple plot that you can kind of half pay attention to, and you're not going to miss anything, and you just want to get into the sound and the wonderful character design and the amazing use of color, just to dazzle you for an hour and 22 minutes or whatever it is, then this is a good one to watch. And I think if you've got kids as well,
yeah, for sure.
I mean, whether they'll come back to it or not, I think it's got enough iconic type characters and enough I don't know, enough childlike qualities of mystery and darkness and oppositional goodness in these things to get a kid involved and to get them sat and properly watched.
I agree.
Probably more so than Star Wars, I would say. I remember my cousin recently, we sat down with Star Wars and I don't know, 10 minutes, couldn't deal with it. Why is it on a farm, Daddy? Where are the spaceships, Daddy? So I think Secret of Nimh will probably fit a little bit better into that kind of age group.
Possibly. I can't really speak to that one way or another, but you might be right.
No, I haven't got kids, so no, not anymore. But yeah, I think it's not up there with Black Cauldron. It's not up there with Watership Down. It's just a very, very wonderfully visually designed film that's really fun, and one you can get out of the way really quickly and enjoy with your kids if you want to. It was a good laugh going back to after such a long time. But it's not a film I'll be picking up again for quite a long time, I would imagine. And
I mean, same here. I'm content to sort of let it exist in my memory. And sort of the nostalgic feeling of watching it as a kid.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
and the impact it had.
Well, in my mind, as you probably emblazoned in that little square, it's amazing.
Yeah.
But now it's a good animated film that's got quite a few problems that don't quite stand up now. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, that was The Secret of Nimh. As we said, go and watch it. It's only an hour and a half, or less than an hour and a half, and it's a really nice visual delight with some.
And it's done Bluth first, which set him off on a number of really interesting and different animated films, like An American Tale, which came afterward, and then A Land Before Time, which came after that. All three in the 80s, and all three were really, really solid viewing experiences as a kid.
Oh yeah, Land Before Time is great, and I've always liked Fievel. Who doesn't? Come on. Great designs. And they've both got wonderful stories. They really have. Especially Fievel.
Yeah.
Right. So, next week we have got something rather special for you. We're going to do a bit of a special guesty type thing for our 25th episode of our mainline series. And that special guest is Carrick from ACG. He'll be dropping by and he's chosen the film for next week. And that film is The Dark Crystal. Jim Henson's piece of absolute genius.
Yep.
So, can't wait for that. Right, thank you so much for watching. Talk to us in the comments, guys. What are your favourite animated films? Have you got any that stick out that you've stuck with for your whole life that are just amazing to you? Do you agree with us about Secret of Nimh? Does it hold up? Does it not hold up? What elements about it do you like? What elements maybe do you think are a little bit shaky now when you rewatch it again? Thank you so much for watching. This has been the Last Edit Podcast. I've been Citizen Sleeve.
I've been Silver Hawkins.
And we shall see you next week. Bye-bye.
Take care.